All right, this is Nick Asayan, CEO, Light Helmets, and this is Light Impact, Season 2, Episode 3. And I got a very special guest
just won't outwork us. If it comes down to work, we're just not going to get outworked, and whatever that is. We may not be the best, and be quite honest, we're not. But we're not going to we're not going to fail at that. That's the one thing we'll make sure we do.
I would guess in the position that he was in, right? It's a life and death. You're training people, and you got to train them harder than what they're most likely going to see in real world.
Yeah.
So you got to grind them, and you see all of these egos come in, and nobody comes into Top Gun or fighter weapons school at the Air Force and thinks, I'm a shitty pilot. I mean, they know that they're the tip of the spear. So your dad's constantly being challenged. So all of a sudden, here's Luke, showing up, challenging him at the dinner table or whatever. There's no way that that's a normal conversation, right?
Well, and I didn't know it back then. Like I said, I never wanted to be I always wanted to do the military probably, but I never wanted to do pilot. I was actually going to be. I joined the Marine Corps. I was going to be an infantry officer. And I didn't, completely opposite.
Sure.
Oddly enough, the MEPS out of LA didn't have any ground contracts at the time, so I had to take the air tests, and it kind of dawned on me the reason I went to the Marine Corps is because if I couldn't fly, an eye issue, an injury, something, or I just didn't have the aptitude or wasn't good enough, to land on your feet somewhere in other branches, you would have landed in a chair force somewhere.
Yeah.
Riding a chair, serving a chair, fighting a war from a chair. In the Navy, more than likely, you're going to find yourself on a ship, which is again admirable and commendable. But for me, as a Marine, I got and I actually had a chance to do this because of the needs of the Marine Corps and the entire DoD. The beginning of Iraq, if I would have not been able to fly, I would have landed in the infantry or some kind of ability to actually go forward and do that, which actually, again, I said happened. There's this thing called individual augmentation where the needs of the Marine Corps, because we're the smallest service, we only get 6% of the Department of Defense's budget. So it's actually currently less than JSOC.
Wow.
So and that's with all our F-35s, we don't get quite the budget. So we say that we've been doing more with less for so long, we can almost do everything with nothing.
It's funny, people don't realize it, right? Like the Marines kept the Cobra helicopter, they kept the Huey helicopter, they just kept, rubbing on the thing, still flying the old Hornets versus, you go to the Army and they've got like the latest, greatest Apache, all the crazy electronics.
That's kind of the interesting thing about the Marine Corps is we invest in the human, because ultimately human can self-adapt to where the equipment won't. Right, the equipment is you buy it and it's financial out. Whereas I can invest in the human, which is still expensive, but the human with the right philosophies can actually grow themselves. Yeah. So it's less expensive, as an exponential payback.
That's interesting, and I want to touch on that when we talk a little bit about sports, because you see that a lot. Mm-hmm. It's not always the school that's the best funded or the team that's the best funded. Look at the Cowboys, right? Mm-hmm. That perform. So what sports did you play as a kid, and where were you kind of in the pecking order? Like, there's the kids that just come rolling out and they're just kicking everybody's ass right away. Yeah. Sometimes they're a little older in their class, but what sports did you play?
I played a little bit of everything. Soccer, I was an 80s baby, so we're talking soccer, baseball. I couldn't, my mom and dad, my mom primarily wouldn't let me play football until a little bit later, but a little bit of basketball, wrestled, and then in high school got into lacrosse. And those were kind of the generic, but surfing kind of took over my life in the junior high years, as I could do a lot more surfing. I want to say I missed like 40 or 50 days in 3 years of junior high and how that worked out. But in high school, sports hit, and my parents had a great point that you have the rest of your life to surf, and you can surf the rest of your life. So do the things you can do now in sports that you won't be able to do once high school's over. And I do appreciate that. And now
did you resist it? Sorry.
I resisted it, and I look back now to some level. I do think I have a standing self philosophy, or really probably more of an experiment going on. I think what you learn in the years, in your pubescent years, will stick with you forever. So I look at men and women that I respect and have always respected, and who they are, and in their mental, physical, and spiritual health, and how they get along in life. And I look at the things that they are naturally good at, and then through conversation, whether they know it or not, I'm usually asking them what they did, in high school in those times, because that's the puberty years. And I really do believe that what you do in those years doesn't matter what you come, because life in any direction will have hard.
Sure.
So people don't look at what's hard and what's easy. Look at who you want to become and what what direction might help you evolve you in that direction through the good and absolutely the bad. That's the real test typically. And when you come out of the dust and you have to get back onto some level of routine or structure or capability of what it is you wanted, the essence of yourself, a lot of people wait till retirement, kids out of the house or whatever that is. It's ultimately what I've seen is the things that they did in those 13 to 20 year time frame. Really, really resonates with a speed of reoccurrence when you get older in life. If and again, I'm not the oldest, but I'm not the youngest. If you were intentional about those times.
Do you think that the habits that you build, and some of that's your parents, some of that's the sports you play, some of it's your own decisions, the kids you hang out with, their parents and how they influence you. You have all these different things, maybe where you live, surfing, unstructured versus structured, like if you're playing football. In that 13 to 20-year-old, do you think that all of those habits carry through your whole life and then it's way harder to make the change? Or what are your thoughts?
Yes. Yes and no, but yes to the idea. I was just having this conversation with my daughter yesterday, and she was talking about studying something. Again, I'm dyslexic, so you asked me a question a little while ago in sports. In the classroom, because back then we're talking about reading, and I had to go to special reading classes, and again, to some level, I think I missed, the 3 years of what's an adjective, what's a verb, what's a noun. Like I had to go back and kind of learn that because I was going to special reading classes, and they just wanted to make sure I could read.
Sure.
And they didn't really know what the issue was. But you come back to the sports field and somebody has something to say in the classroom where I'd say I was probably the dominant at the time, if not the dominant, one of the most dominant. Elementary school, probably the most dominant. Junior high, still high school, in that echelon because you're starting to get more people. College, from a sports perspective, I played college football. I'm not the most dominant, the most aggressive. I'm not going to be the less. I wasn't the biggest, wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest playing strong safety at Colorado, but I made sure that every time I hit, somebody could feel it. There wasn't going to not be a feeling on the other side, even at the issues of my own neck and whatnot. On the other side of that is when you, on the studying side and learning through the Marine Corps and through aviation and flying, and I'll say there's probably not very many human beings more tested than single seat Marine Corps fighter pilots, because of because to be a Marine Corps officer, there's an extra 6 months of leadership school that, again, part of the investment in the human versus the product that you go through, called the basic school after boot camp. All the other services just do boot camp, and they're kind of teaching you in those 13 weeks, where our boot camp's only 10 weeks. And that's just an interview process.
Sure.
So if you make it through that, then you go through a 6-month process that's a leadership school, premier leadership school of the world, like navigation, communication, shoot, move, communicate, can lead 40 people into combat, whether you're a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker in the Marine Corps. Whatever it is you do, you can go lead 40 human beings. Every Marine a rifleman, every Marine officer a platoon commander. And from there you go into flight school, and again, psychology, philosophy. Majority of the guys I'm with are either academy grads or engineers or math, very mechanical. I got an analytical brain, thank God, but that's probably the only thing that kept me up, along with the fact that the way that I grew up, habits.
Sure.
My dad was an Iowa farm kid, learned how to drive a tractor at 8 years old. So guess what? I get to learn how to drive a Honda Civic that it ultimately became my high school car at the age of 8. And I'm starting to learn, driving on this lap, and then, we come home from church or whatever, I jump out of go from left seat to right seat. I get to jump out of the passenger seat, go jump in the left seat, and just around the neighborhood, just up the street, but,
sure.
Hopping along in a stick shift, and I want to say I was 10 or 11. We went over to the junior high that I ended up going to. It was one of the steepest hills in town that didn't have a bunch of people on it. And it was, use the clutch to hold space. Like, I don't want you to roll a foot back or a foot forward. Just hold us where we are with the clutch at 11 years old. So oddly enough, that I took my driver's license in a test in a stick shift, a non-power steering stick shift, truck kind of thing. I taught, I want to say, at least 10 if not 15 of my friends how to drive stick. It was just that mentality, and again, going back to habit patterns and layering in layering and development is, I think, what got me through flying.
Sure.
And through the test side of it, the written test. When we kind of got to the functional side of flying, again, I had a couple of issues in the beginning part of flying when I first got the jets, because it's all of the book work, and it's really, really heavy, like airline style flying. Take off, fly, land.
Yeah.
But through the clouds with an emergency. Again, that's one of the unique things in military flying is the first time you get into an actual jet, you're in the back seat, and they have this hood that goes over your, they call it, it's to practice, instrument flight rules.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty difficult because it's all the numbers, it's all
so you're blinded to what's going on outside the jet.
Correct.
Right?
So you put it on right as you get on the runway, you put it over your head, and then the instructor's in the front seat, he takes you off, and right when you pass 300 feet, he hands you the controls.
Yeah.
And so you're flying as if you're in the clouds from 300 feet on, and then you spin the whole, and then as you turn on to final, at the end, you're taking off the hood, and for an hour you've been in this little window.
It's weird, right?
Yeah, and talk about vertigo, and they talk about just press the I believe button and trusting and stuff. But
yeah,
so that's a lot of the book flying. It's a lot of the highway in the sky that we don't talk about, you don't see, but there's an actual rule book that where you're supposed to be in. You can get a ticket, if you will, and you get a ticket or 2 or 3, definitely 3 strikes you're out.
Yeah.
But at any given time, and I've seen 3 or 4 different buddies that they were doing well, very well. Again, a double PhD kind of guy that landed on the run one way after coming back from dropping bombs, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was it for him. That was the one strike and done.
Wow.
Like, you're out.
Yeah.
You don't get to go back. And so I had this moment where I'd had an eye infection. I kind of fallen behind my class. They were trying to push me to catch up, and that wasn't the right time. It was right in the beginning of jets. And I had 2 strikes, basically. And my on-wing had written me this letter and said, hey, you have all the skills, you have all the ability, but I can't tell you that your next flight won't be your last. I just couldn't tell you what is or isn't going to happen. But I will say that if, let's just say you sold a Ferrari and you knew the cops were on your tail and you knew you were going to jail. Like, besides going out and hurting anybody, but you knew at the end of this tank of gas
you're done.
This is it.
Yeah.
You're going to go away for a little while. Like that, if you go out and fly, the next time you fly, like this buddy I just talked about, he didn't know he never flew again in that capacity.
Yeah.
A military aircraft where you can go fly it to balls to the wall. It's expected.
Sure.
Right? He said if you don't go out and fly it like that, you're going to regret every day of the rest of your life that you didn't go out there and enjoy it. And from that day forward, it changed my perspective. It just changed my perspective on life, that this is what it is. Because of my dyslexia, I started sneaking into the simulator room on my own at night. I'd put a little blocker in there. I just started doing the, kind of, if you will, for lack of a better term, that 80s montage.
Yeah.
That is not as longer than 30 seconds or a minute. It's 6 months or 6 years in some cases. In the things that I learned there, I basically just got to a place where I just went through I'd go for a run. I would hit a speed bag. I'd row. I would juggle. I would do stuff where my hands were being busy or my body was busy, and I would just go through every single button.
Yeah.
Every single button.
At the same time, right? To train yourself.
Correct.
That when your respiration's up or your heart rate's up or you're
Correct.
distracted with something, that those things were automatic, right?
But in the fact of building habits, so what I did was I'd just go through and I'd just go button. So I just start my run and I'd look on a note card, put it in my waistband or whatever, and I'd just go through every single button. And then I'd get to the end of the, I was like leaving the line, and then I'd get to the end of the runway before takeoff. I'd go through every single button, and then I'd get on the runway, every single button, and just got to the place where I would say it was obsessive, but it's this whole, like, I'm not gonna not work harder than the next thing. And so it got to the place with what this instructor told me and how I got there. I still remember I had pulled for my instrument check ride, which is kind of the big moment. That's the moment right before you get to go become like your first solo pilot. They let you go fly by yourself to go on and do what you need to do.
Yeah.
But you're still instructed, you're still learning, but you can go fly by yourself, and you can take off and bring this thing back with this level of emergency. And if you had to eject, then there's a high likelihood that you had to.
Yeah. Yeah.
High enough that we're not wasting money.
You weren't panicking.
Correct. And we're not killing people. So I still remember I'd taken off, and it actually was an instrument day. There was this little hole down in South Texas, where South Texas, this clouds come in, and this little hole off to the right. And I got to the end of the runway, and I was like, fuck it. And there's this thing called a low transition. And anybody that know me because I come from a group of buddies, my dad's buddies, that talked about low transitions. And it's where you take off the aircraft and you keep it within ground effect, where there's no induced drag.
Yeah.
And it accelerates faster because there's not the extra drag, but the extra push, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. So you're pretty parallel to the ground?
Parallel to the ground, and you're within 1/2 wing's length from the ground. So it looks cool, and you're down, and there's a couple of like Harrier guys the Harriers are the best at it. The Harrier pilots are the best at it, because it's a good buddy of mine, I'll talk about in a second. Like, his last flight, he never got above 300 feet. Wow. So, which Marine Corps rules and low levels are supposed to be above 300, nothing below, whatever, not going to get into it. But I just remember taking the, kind of just fuck it. Like, instead of the guy jumping into the jet, there was a moment like you're putting the jetpack on your back. Like, I'm here, I'm now. And I just remember taking off, and the instructor in the back I had pulled for my, this day just happened to be one of the dickheads. Yeah. The strict guys it was just, it had me, I didn't sleep the night before, the good 8 hours rest. So I get there, and I was like, okay, here we go. And I see this hole there, and I just remember just kind of just heading down the runway, and just everything just kind of got quiet, and I just went for it. And it was aggressive. It wasn't jerky. It wasn't inappropriate. Yeah. But it was just for sure. Yeah. It was just confident.
Definitive. Yeah.
Correct. Like, this is it. I am here. There's no longer am I going to be afraid of what could happen, because it could happen. Yeah. So here I am, and here's what happened. And it really marked a huge difference in what I understood about my development as a kind of dyslexic kid, as an athlete, as all this stuff. And my grades in the first phase, which again is the beeps and squeaks and the nuts and bolts of how to fly the thing. And then the second phase of jets is the tactical side. And that's what I'd call the athletic side. There's a guy there, there's a closure rate, there's, it's like catching a ball or something, right? It's having to see it happen versus the guy that could win on the numbers. Yeah.
Anticipation, and then what options do you have?
Correct. Right? And then living in the real time. And so there was a moment where my second phase grades were some of the highest they had seen in the previous 200 pilots, because my dyslexia, what I learned is actually it's a 3-dimensional process, where reading is it's a 2-dimensional process. It's left to right down the page as an American reader, or Western style reader. In China it's vertical, and it's opposite, right? It's top to bottom, right to left. Yeah. And so if dyslexia was just backwards, we just make a left-handed book, if you will. Right? Right. Make it backwards. But it's not that. It's that reading is a 2-dimensional process, and a lot of people with dyslexia are actually 3-dimensional processors. And 3-dimensional processors, like your Spielbergs and your Tom Cruise, I'm just using big names, but there's a lot of people, artists, that are amazing at stuff. They don't work in the 2-dimensional process, primarily because of speed of requirement in tests in school. Yeah. So when you look at words and you look at a paragraph, I have 30 seconds to get to the bottom of the paragraph. Well, I know at the beginning I'm not going to get there. So my job is to find out what I need to know to answer the test. And as a processor, you're looking at that, which when you get to 3-dimensional processing, you go back to athletics, or you go back to the original athletics, right? The Olympic athletics were survival. Sure. Or either war or survival requirements, right? Throwing the spear to hit somebody, or throwing the spear to get food tonight. Those were all requirements. So what I learned, and then I get into further down the flying, is that's where my flying took off, because I really got to lean into my athletic side of the house, which didn't negate my intelligence. It actually accelerated my intelligence, even though, quote unquote, the book smarts may have passed me by, kind of thing. Yeah. They didn't pass me by. The way that the world requires you to recall it, and the way the world requires you to put it into practice, doesn't really fit into the way that I recall it and the way that I'm good at it.
And a lot of people have this, are in that same space. And I think when you look back, like when I was a kid, I'm older than you, they didn't understand that, hey, there's a different conduit for different people and how they learn. And it doesn't mean that the person's got an issue. They're just different in how they learn. Now, there's people that can't process. There's people that can't absorb, or they absorb slowly, but that's not the issue in this case, right?
Correct.
when you rewind your clock and you're playing football in high school, and then you played football in college, and at the same time you've got academic requirements during that period of time. How did you, and you probably, you knew you learned differently, but how did you do? That's a workload when you play at these schools, right? And Colorado was a top tier school. How did you balance that? And did you get any help, or did you just have to fight through it from the academic perspective?
Help. Well, as an athlete, there is some help there, and I just leaned into it. And that's, I guess, what I'd say is the benefit that I had as a younger kid. And again, so I had to show up and go. I have to get up at 5 a.m. to go read at a tutor's house twice a week. And at 5:30, I'm reading, which I hate reading because it's not paying me back the way I wanted to as a junior high. So I learned, and again, God bless my parents for this part, and my mom, and really leaning into it. But I learned how to succeed at other parts of the requirement that we just have to live to live in our society, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what I ended up with a 3.75 GPA total by the time I graduated, and I think my first 2 years I had straight A's. How do I say it? I did every bit of extra credit. If there was extra credit to be done, I did it.
Yeah.
If I couldn't miss a day of school. I wasn't the one that could read to catch up. So I wouldn't say I did it. I would have study groups. And what I did learn in the study groups is that everything that they could read and recall, that I could recall from what the professor said.
Yeah.
I would go to class. I'd either record, which didn't do right by me necessarily, but or write notes, but I couldn't really even read my notes because I'd get into this. I'm a thinker. And so I think what would happen is a instructor would say something, and I could go into it, which would implant it as a greater memory in my head.
Sure.
And so I only missed 3 classes my entire college career, which is kind of unheard of if you think of. I didn't miss out on any partying. I didn't miss out on, but we have a saying in the Shaffer family, like, if you're going to hoot with the Owls, you're going to scream with the Eagles. So I don't care if you're up until 5, you're going to get up at 6. If you're up until 6, then it's time to go to class. Like, there's no mistake in what your job and your requirement is tomorrow. Yeah. And if whatever you do between now and then, how you enjoy it, well, that's up to you.
And you may suffer for it,
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
I always tell my older son's at Utah, and you've met him along the way, and I'm like, listen, you're working, you're working with the team or football team there, but all you got to do is go to class. I don't care how much you party, you do this, you do that. Obviously, there's a self-preserve, but you got to manage it. And if you go to class, you'll manage to get through. If you start missing class, it's like anything else. You'll see somebody that's violent, or they'll say something nasty to their spouse or whatever. And once you crack that open, then it's just easier for the next and the next and the next. And it's the same with going to class. And it's interesting in hearing what you have to say, and you had to manage through things that some people didn't have to, and still were super successful, and got into a position that probably in the face of the planet is one of the most demanding, multitasking, physical demands and mental demands at the same time in flying a single seat airplane. When you look back at football, how did that help you prepare for doing that job?
Immensely. Football and lacrosse, and it was kind of cool. And I'll just say this real quick: is football in high school was like a primary sport. It took up all summer. It required that militant requirement, if you will, just from a disciplinarian. You got to show up. You got to do your lifting. There's a kind of a multi-phase capability to be a part of 10, hopefully 13, 14 games a year.
Yeah.
Lacrosse on the other side in Southern California at the time was just a club sport. There was 10, 15 teams in San Diego County, and I think of the movie Miracle, all the slapdicks that it was just a bunch of guys that got together, and they didn't do any working out, they didn't do anything like that. They just got together, but when they hit the white line, they were serious.
Yep.
And when they got off the white line, they would joke about it. And I just remember that, and I do appreciate that the football side of it, but with lacrosse brought kind of that somewhat of the same, that surfing mentality where we had and I'll say, for as much greatness football brought to me, lacrosse, because I didn't care about it with regards to where it would take me or the next level, I could go out there and just play.
Yeah. And
I got to play longer, and I will say I couldn't say enough things for having that other sport or that other thing, that unpatterns whatever it is you're focused at.
Yeah.
But also allows you to go out there and just, again, I could step off the football field and be one of the better athletes on the lacrosse field just because of how much work I'd put in on the football side.
Yeah.
And it just had all that other stuff. So, but football definitely, the Marine Corps and the services alike require a lot from you, especially if you want to be good at your job and embody. And I will say at the end, I finally realized I don't know if I was the best Marine. I was an amazing warrior. And that's what I ultimately, because I don't know if I necessarily, the politics and stuff of that nature, it's not really for me. I wouldn't say I'm a lone wolf, but I definitely beat to my own drum, and there is a drum that is being beat, and I can maintain that. I kind of lived that my whole life and was able to live to that. But, playing sports and football in general definitely helped set a base, like you said, going to class and showing up to all these things and learning how to adapt to the requirements of, if you want to be good at anything in life, anything that you care about and want to be one of the best or your best, which will hopefully take you up the spectrum of better, compared to others, if you will. You have to get better at the pain, the discomfort of whatever that is. If you want to be a race car driver, there's discomforts to it. If you want to be a scientist, if you want to be a doctor, anything, a lawyer, there's discomfort of having to sit down and do the work. So nowadays surfing, it gets harder and harder, and all my buddies, that don't surf, it's one of the main reasons they don't surf is because of the logistics of just putting on the wetsuit and taking off and this and that. So
getting showered up, still going to work.
Correct. For me, I'll just do a 30-minute session.
Right. And
I'll only get 23 minutes surfing, but it's the 7 minutes of getting the stuff on and getting the stuff off just to get better at it.
Yeah.
So on the days that the surf was really good this last 2 months, some of the best we've seen in maybe ever, since surfing has been around as a popular sport. Yeah. Just the whole West Coast, the whole Pacific Ocean got amazing storms. But when the waves are good and the capability that if you don't have that in your practice, the discomfort, it won't even be comfortable by the time you go to do it because you haven't been doing it.
Sure.
So now the real discomfort shows when you need it the most. When now it's uncomfortable because now you're upset at yourself and now you're disappointed you're only a shadow of what you once were.
Or it could be, right?
Correct. And it's a conundrum. But if you want to be good at anything in life, getting better at the discomforts, not accepting. I don't say accepting. How do I say? Accepting you to become a different human than you're desiring to be.
Yeah.
That's the wrong discomfort, and knowing where that line is, but understanding that there is a discomfort, and if you're letting the discomfort drive you away, then your discipline is being tested, and you're not going to make it really good at anything in life if you can't really find and just go at the discomfort first.
Yeah. It's this is a great topic, right? And people don't think about it, but think about all the highest functioning organizations in the globe. If you take a startup business where everybody's grinding away, you have constant anxiety, right? Discomfort. You got to work late. You got to work on weekends. You never can, put your computer phone. You're constantly connected. You lose some time with your family. You can't go out and whoop it up or party. You can't take as many vacations. So there's discomfort. It's a low grade discomfort. Then go to a higher functioning organization, Marine Corps or the teams. Man, these guys are young. They're in the water the whole time. You're not eating. You're not sleeping. They're kicking your ass. They're sanding your shoes. You got calluses. You got a wooden boat on your head. You have all of these different things, but the discomfort that you get used to dealing with, all of a sudden, it's not this glaring issue. It's kind of a pain in the ass that it's there, but you can work through it. But the organization codifies too as a group, right? Like the guys you played football with and the Marines that you fought with. I think discomfort and challenging groups tightens the group up. And obviously it works, or all these organizations wouldn't be doing it for 50 years, 60 years, 100 years. Correct. And you're the benefactor of that when you get done, because usually when you're in a group of people, whether you're competing against them or they're working with or for you or alongside of you, however that is, they're not used to that. So those people kind of rise to the top. I've got a buddy, he did one of these shows, Boris said, we've talked about him briefly before. And, he raced NASCAR. and you race sports cars, and the focus that you need there, and hey, the attention to detail and your habits and what you do and how you think and confidence and having pride in what you do every day and being able to overcome that stuff serves them well in business. And it's the same thing,
Yeah.
the same thing with you. And I think high school football and all that work, and then you played at a D1 college, and then jumping in the jet and doing some of the things on the ground, which I want to talk about too. What do you think about, as a little bit off topic, but now Deion Sanders going to Colorado? Like, what's your opinion? Because it's, I watched him I loved him as an athlete.
Yeah.
At the start, I didn't like him because I'm like, God, that guy's a little bit too flashy for me. But when I realized he was celebrating the accomplishment, the game, and having fun and not grinding it in somebody's face.
Yeah.
And he was very kind to my father at a event down in Dallas when he got inducted in the Hall of Fame. In my opinion, certainly changed it. But he did a great job at Jackson State. But what do you think about this whole Colorado thing?
I'm excited to see how he does. He's a human just like the rest of us, and he's if you just leave him where he was and you take him for where he was then the biggest ability for him to not change is you, not him.
That's right. That's a great point. Yeah.
So one of the, they talk about, addicts or whatever. One of the biggest, if tonight I have a huge epiphany and I wake up and I come in and see you tomorrow and I've changed my whole world just from whatever the event is, which does happen daily around the world for different people. And I show up and see you again and you see me as I was yesterday and every day before that, then the biggest ability for me not to continue to change is
me. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the other side of the discomfort. You don't want to get so used to discomfort that you start to look forward to the pain. Because now the only way you'll be able to measure your health and your wellness and your capability and your growth is off the pain. You actually want to be in love with the feel good and the joy. So it doesn't mean that you want to fall in love with the pain, because that's the other side of this. And I have done that because there were some heavy emotional things going on with I had a divorce going on. I had multiple deployments that were all, 4 deployments within about 6 years that were just in living and training and teaching, really not just to hurt people, to kill lots of human beings very quickly, very effectively, and I'm gonna say for a business model, but with the mindset, the probability of kill is part of what P sub K is what we talk about.
Sure.
Right. So it becomes a science of doing this, and so you start to get to this place where I tell people one of the worst things you can feel at all in life is nothing at all.
Yeah.
And then really the sad truth is when you do get to that place of numb and not feeling, at least through my experience, is one of the only way backs is in what I think might be one of the only way backs is through pain. Is because you'll feel that first.
Right.
Because joy is on, that's from a physiological standpoint. As a human, your body has to feel pain. You have to process fear. You don't necessarily have to process joy.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why you can, because that it's survival.
True. Yeah.
It's just straight survival, and that's why I'm not going to get to politics, but our leaders, I can't convince all of you off of joy to go come over here.
Right.
But I can say, whatever that is, and you will run over there.
Yeah. Fear, pain,
cattle,
loss.
Just think cattle. Right. We're not. Hey, come over here. Brown cow. It's and the cow. We know it's going to run over there. That's why we put the arena over here and put the cowboy over there, and that's ultimately, so to further that, maybe I lost it a little quick. What was the
Deion?
Deion. I think Deion is a phenomenal guy. Again, he was flashy for me back in the day, but I mean, come on, he's Deion. His statistics, they've shown his statistics playing will never be as good as some of the others. Like you got LeBron just broke, last night just broke Kareem's all-time.
Yeah, scoring, yeah.
In this case, Deion, because of who he was, will never have the statistics because he was so good that he would shut down a side of the field.
Yeah.
He would just shut down a side of the field, and so that game, he just doesn't get the statistics.
Sure.
Because they just won't throw over there. Like that's to be that person. I'm not going to say he was a superhero. He was a superhero though, from a physical standpoint.
Sure.
And by the way, he didn't just do that. He also played baseball. So in the off season, while everybody's taking the time off, he's going to play a sport that's 182 games a season or whatever it was back then. 160 games is like insane.
Yeah,
insane amount of God-given and hard work, talent that he had. So I think that he has more than enough inside of him. I just hope that, and again, I know he's had his own trials and tribulations, and I think that is probably his greater greatness, and that's what makes him human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Superman isn't relatable until he has kryptonite.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's indestructible.
Yeah.
Kryptonite is what when we watch a movie on that, like that, now that's amazing because he had to fight something that was hard, and this is again Dion's own physical issues over the years. I think will have given him more to give back to these guys because he's been at the very top. And what harder than to have to fight yourself?
Sure.
From the greatest in the world at something.
His he went through divorce. I mean, I've been through divorce. You've been through divorce. You have that, and then you're in the public eye, and the other person is not in the public eye, and they're just throwing rocks at you. If you defend yourself, now it's a topic. If you don't defend yourself, the people around you are like, why are you not defending yourself?
Must be true, yeah.
So he was in a tough spot there, but then the physical challenge that he had with all of these operations and the infection, and he couldn't walk, and he was in the scooter, and you went through that, and the highs to highs and the lows to lows, and he was a character, and I'm sure if we sat down with him, he'd say, yeah, I made these mistakes like we all have. Not necessarily a regret, but it was a mistake, right? And sometimes it's based on your emotion. Sometimes it's based on the information I had at the time. I made the best decision I could to do something, and I just made a bad decision because I used the information I had. I didn't have all the intel. But the thing I like about the guy is that, one, he doesn't go out and swing the race card all over the place, right? Yeah. There are issues, and he recognizes the issues. But when he sits down and says, hey, you're going to sit at the front in class. You're not going to wear a hat. You're not going to do this. You're going to do that. You're going to be disciplined. You're going to be polite. You're going to be respectful. You're going to be part of a solution. I love that stuff. And it doesn't matter if it's a black kid, a white kid, a Samoan kid, or whatever else. When everybody's in a huddle, and we've had this conversation, you and I have, and everybody that's played football says the same thing. Nobody gives a shit about your race. If you're 2 years younger, you're a senior, you're a freshman, you've got a girlfriend, you don't. Nobody cares. It's third and eight. I'm sure when I've not been there, you've been there. When you're fighting, nobody cares about any of those things, right? And one of the things I think that was unique that you had shared with me is, most of the time people think somebody's a fighter pilot, and you're in a pretty sterile environment. If let's say you're in the Air Force and you're flying a F-22 and you just shut down the Chinese reconnaissance aircraft. I'm not going to call it a fucking balloon because it wasn't, right? But so that the guys in a plane, the planes are all pretty much the same. At least F-22s are, right? You get in, you land, you're staying in a nice bed, you're doing this, you're doing that. When you're in the Marine Corps, you're not necessarily always doing that, right? So you had a lot of responsibilities just by structure that you were actually on the ground dealing with, like indigenous forces and ground combat. Walk me through that and give people an idea of, hey, this isn't just a guy that was flying in this sterile environment. And I'm not picking on the Air Force guys because we got Air Force guys involved here. But
so the idea was, so I talked about this earlier. The Marine Corps at the time, 2007, 6, 7, they needed people to go forward and just be over there doing stuff. There was everything from butcher, baker, candlestick makers. There was coffee makers. There was, I say that in jest, but they just needed people to fill jobs.
Yeah.
And 2 days before I got out of what's called the RAG, or now that's the FRS, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, is where I just got done learning the F-18, ready enough supposedly to go to the fleet and now go forth and protect the country.
Because there's one squadron of Hornets on a carrier along with the Navy squadrons, right?
Correct. And I was not a carrier-based pilot. My squadron was just prior to me, but the West Coast has one carrier base, and now we're going back as the F-35 comes online, and then the F-18s this is. The West Coast had one, which is the 323 Snakes, and then the East Coast had two.
Got it.
So that was kind of the answer. So not every carrier had a Marine Hornet squadron, but so I had just gotten done with that, and as I got done with that, I had 2 days. My last flight was 2 days away, and they said, hey, the next 11 guys, so the next 13 guys going to MAG 11 are going to IA, and I was kind of the guy that was doing this, because it was a mixed squadron at the time, was Navy Marine Corps, because we train, all of our wings are Navy developed, right? It's Navy money to get us there. And he was laughing, kind of joking, so I wasn't sure if he was serious. So I couldn't, at the end of the all officers meeting called an AOM, I walk up and I said, are you serious about that? And he said, yes. And I didn't have anything else to do that day, so I literally walked over to Mag 11. Thank God I was on the same base. And I just went and talked to the guy. I did, again, kind of what I'd learned as a, kind of be my own self-advocate, through high school and college with some of the learning disabilities. I had to go up and talk to teachers. I had to go out and I had to go and find a study partner. I wasn't going to survive on my own.
Yeah.
And I think what I'd realized there, and as a psychology major, and what I got to do, some of the stuff I got to do in the military side of the house and the psychological operation capabilities, is we are a pack animal. So I'll say this real quick on a quick aside, is that the greatest thing about any human being, the very first thing great about them, is being human. That's it. Like, without that, think about every other animal. Again, I talked about this with my daughter yesterday. If we are not necessarily gods, we are like gods, or God-like to, let's say, ants, right? Well, what would you expect God to do to you as you're running through, the kitchen with there's sugar right there, and you're
right.
I have a chance to enact that. Now, everything between an ant all the way up to the dogs and to the family. If you're not willing to do and look at it as, hey, I have a strength over this thing, it's not the person that goes to and uses that strength. It's the person that chooses not to every time until they have to.
Right.
Yeah. That's the strongest person.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the strongest human being, not the person that just can and does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I'd say, again, nothing against the UFC or any of these things. I think it implies that because you're strong, you have to go be that. And I think that is a thought of the old.
Yeah.
And it's coming to the forth, but being the one that chooses to walk away, not because you can't, the person that just can't defend themselves and walks away, not strong.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson just said that. He's like, hey, you want masculinity. You want someone to be dangerous. The person that's dangerous but that controls it, that's what you want. Otherwise, you can't get things done.
Yeah.
And, the person that can't project or accomplish or commit to violence when needed, or let's say on a football field, but controls it. Hey, the whistle blows, and your son was just going full bore for 8 seconds, and he had to stop.
Correct.
And he had to do that over and over, even if he got hit in the throat, even if he was angry, even if the guy said something about his mom, he had to stop. And that discipline over time, and then that gets magnified even greater when you're in the military, and even greater when you start to get into these more specialized moments.
And so, yes. And so to get back on topic to what you asked me, is as I finished this, so I went over to this guy's office and I saw all of the jobs that were lined up. And then, again, I make jest of it, but it was, general aide, general coffee maker, barista, like high level. It was all these 7-month deployments that would have been taking me out of the cockpit for probably 8 months for prep and getting there and all that stuff. And but the experience was going to be on a base, very sanitized American, if you will, still rough living and still not what we live here.
Yeah.
And then there was one that was called a police transition team, where it's like, oh, what's this one? And he's like, oh, you'd be, probably, it's a 13-man team. It's not that level of, but it was the Marine Corps' attempt to try to get funding for after the war, because they had the money, the plus-up money, to get into the Green Beret mission and the sustainment force.
Yeah.
Because the surge force requirement from the Marine Corps, we're the kill dog in the pig hunting moment. We're the surge force, and then Army comes in behind us. The Navy gets everything there and all the logistics, and they can support obviously from the water. And then the Air Force comes in and they can sustain long-term sustainment. But the Marine Corps is very much our severe surge force. To hit that beach, we want the Marines doing it, kind of thing. And so and they said you could be a part of this team, and I said, oh, where would I be? Like, oh, you'd probably be like an XO or second guy, third guy in charge, OPSO, third guy in charge. I was like, could I put my name in for this one? It was 13 months versus 8 months out of cockpit.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time, especially as a new guy, hasn't had this stuff. But going back to why I chose the Marine Corps, is I wanted to be. I looked forward to that that opportunity. So I got kind of a cool month of flying, where I basically got to do all the cool flying, which is called basic fighter maneuvering with my squadron, and then I had to go away. So I got these first 4 cool flights, and then 5 flights, and I got to go away. And then I go away and I go check in up at Camp Pendleton, and I show up and it says Captain Schaefer. At the time I was a Lieutenant Schaefer, OIC. And so I see my seat, and we go through our introductions, and everybody's there. And at the end of the first water break or a 10-minute break, I go up to the instructor and said, what's OIC stand for? Is that officer in charge? He's like, yeah.
So you thought it might be number 2 or 3,
Yeah,
and now you're in charge of the whole thing.
Yeah, so I go into the shitter and I sit there looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, what the? Because I get to spend the last 3 years, living a life, again, it was kind of live or die, every day with because your schedule for the next day of flying comes out the day before. So It's not like you have this big, long, really well laid out plan, and the weather's bad, then that you're ready for the thing, and then you don't get to go get it tested. You want to get through the test, and you don't. So it's so I'm living this whole life like this, and then you come back over to this, and now it's kind of, I will say that was probably the time I leaned into my high school leadership time, because I was a good, not the best, but a good dominant athlete that allowed me to be on the captain side of the house multiple times, and having that leadership background and leadership experiences really, it took me about 3 weeks to really kind of, because we were just kind of going through the introductory stuff. And then I finally just grabbed the bull by the horns, and I was like, I did kind of just beat to my own drum. Started showing up. We show up early. We do a lunchtime workout with the guys, and I started getting to the place where I started to learn a little about where we're going into Iraq. What's called Rawa, Ana. It was the Palm Springs of Iraq. It's the Sunni. We're just getting in the Sunni part of the world, and it's where Saddam, because he's a Ba'athist, right? Yeah. And that they're Sunni, but he was living in Baghdad. So whenever his retirement guys in his group and his staff would go and retire, they'd move back up there. And that was like their safety spot. Yeah. Because his Ba'athist headquarters was about 200 yards from where I lived, with the police in their police department. 31 laps around the building to get a mile, kind of thing. Like just a really small space, and there's 13 of us living there, kind of thing. So what I learned, though, and I know it now, obviously in retrospect, but there was every single house there, because of their way of living, and women are prized, and they don't want another man peeping over they have these 7 to 8 foot walls around every house. Yeah. So when you start to go into these houses and you start to clear them, or you're moving in and you're teaching police officers, again, what the hell do I know about teaching police officers as a pilot, Marine trained trained F-18 pilot? Like, really nothing. But you start to have to break things down into these dumb things down into the lowest thing. And I'll just tell you right now that I'd say at least 20 of them couldn't even read. Wow. Some of them couldn't even count their own cash for their payday. Yeah. Like, we just pay it for, whatever. So we were dealing with a lot more than just teaching them how to police. Right. But what I had learned in the training prior to this, that they had these 8 foot walls. So I'd take my guys out, we'd go to the obstacle course, and I'd put them through one at a time, boots and utes, which is just, skivvy top and your utility bottoms and boots, one at a time. And then we'd take a second rest, and 2 at a time, no more than an arm's length away, and then we do 4 at a time. Then we do a lap or 2 just to kind of cool down, and then we all went through, put our gear back on, and we all went through again, 1 at a time, 2 at a time, 4 at a time. And they wouldn't know this, because there's 14 obstacles. There's 7 of them are just railroad tie laid horizontal. So 7 of them are the same. Yeah. The other 7 are the main obstacles. And the middle one is a wall, to climb over this wall. Sure. And, I've got a guy that's 138 pounds that, can't really get up with a full combat load on his chest, slightly tilted. Learned this on a patrol. He fell down, and because you can't bend with your SAPI plates and all that stuff, you can't bend, and he got stuck upside down and he never skied before or whatever. Yeah. Get your feet downhill and stand up or whatever. I had another guy that was, could carry 3 people, but he couldn't get over a freaking 3 foot wall. Wow. Yeah. Right. So in this process of training these guys, I had to to revert back to some of the stuff I knew from I just need to know. Sure. And they're not going to give me any credit for not, or whatever it is. And, we're going to a spot where we may not have as many deaths, but we have a lot more maiming. Injuries. Yes. And, legs and can't use for the lower half of your body. Again, as a 26-year-old male, this is not being able to use the lower half of your body is pretty much devastating to all, all life, at least at that point in life. So, I'm starting to think about this, and if I don't get these guys ready for this, and then better yet, my job, again, I played some quarterback in high school, was not necessarily as an officer to action any major weapon. My job was to action the team. Mm-hmm. That was my job. Action the group, action the team as they move. And if I'm shooting, it's because of absolute necessity that I need to do that so I can get back to running. You had to delegate, and you had very, very effectively. But you also need to know that if I go through this house right now, And again, there's only 13 of us. And again, this is a time that there was a lot of money in the military. You know, I had 5 vehicles. I can only drive 3 of them, even though I had 13 Marines, 1 sailor, 2 interpreters, and then throughout the 7 months there, we had an array of 10 different police officers, you know, that came from the States, teaching and helping and whatnot. And 1 former IRA defendant, he was Irish. I don't know what they call them. I forget the term, but the guy had been shot, blown up, you know, poisoned, everything under the sun, you know, fighting the IRA. But working through this, I could only drive 3 of these vehicles. So I had about 20 guys I was in charge of, but I only had 13 warfighters that were offensively capable. So I had to know their skills. So Chris, I got to get him over the wall first because he'll carry 3 on the other side. This guy can carry himself over the wall and he's fine. So it starts to understand, like, through these little bits of training, going through the pain, to really figure out when the real pain comes. Meaning, like, and I don't think most humans don't know this, but if you haven't shat yourself scared in a while, you probably haven't seen what is coming at us, towards us, right? That fear is fight, flight, fuck, or freeze.
Yeah.
We are all of those things as a species. And, you know, again, a lot of your MMA and fighters that want to go, you know, fight, and they're in this little very, very sanitized world.
Sure.
There's nothing outside. All you can do is laser focusing on this thing and train for it and eat for it and all these things. Whereas everything's not like that in a real world fight. It's the opposite. All those things are a part of your life, and now you still have to fight.
Yeah. And
what I would say is when you get to that place, the person that is more adept and more capable is the one that knows that we are all of those fight, flight, fuck, or freeze. But let's go fight, flight, or freeze. And at that moment, and I say right now, we're sitting here, a polar bear goes walking by this door, and the door's open. All 3 of us are freeze.
Yeah.
Like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
You know, until something happens, because we're not getting out of this room, so now we have to fight.
Yeah.
But knowing that scale and knowing how that lives inside of you, and having tested that at all prior to the real situation, because I'll tell you right now, something could happen right now and I'd be running like crazy, and you might be here and save the day. And just because I have these experiences doesn't mean that will happen now.
Yeah.
And there's story after story where guys that had won the Medal of Honor later on in life from that one paddle, 2 weeks later were curled up in a foxhole from whatever reason. And what I will say is your mindset when that thing happens is what is typically, if you just got a letter from Rita and you're sad and all of a sudden that boom goes off, you might be in a different mindset where I'm sad, I'm scared, or I just got a newsletter about my son, whatever. Currently my son's in the hospital right now. I'm reading that and the boom goes off. I might just be over myself.
Yeah.
On the other end, maybe I got to see him again, and
You're Superman.
I'm running at it. I don't care if I die. Like, I'm getting home or whatever. And everybody acts differently. But if you haven't gone through some stuff that would, in this case, football, you know, things that you could do. There's, you know, to test yourself a little bit along the way, layer by layer. That absolutely will pay you back in the times that you need it. And when you are that scared and that out of sorts, and there's people looking at you, requiring on you, like, and I can see it as clear as day as I'm looking at you, like driving away from that building in Camp Pendleton and just waving bye to my family. Like, I really didn't think I was coming home, at least not full, because I also knew about myself that I was the guy that wasn't just gonna like hide behind the wall. Like, I was the guy that was gonna go out there and do it. Like, I wasn't gonna let one of my dudes suffer out there. If nobody else could do it, I knew I could do it.
Right.
And again, I don't want not to toot my own horn. I was a good enough athlete. I was a good enough. Again, I tell people I'm a A-, B+ person, you know, in life. Like, that's where I live. That's where my grades. That's who I am. But in a well-rounded model, which has ultimately allowed me to be in better rooms and in rooms that of some of the best, if not the best in the world. Which is really, really cool, because you get a chance to look around and then they look, some maybe assort to you as one of the best in the world. And that really draws that pack animal confidence that we are surrounded, and I can absolutely be okay with not being the best at that.
Sure.
And what I will say is that more of the people I've been around that are amazing at something, that really know that they're amazing at something, they also have a unique skill to know exactly what they are not good at.
Yeah.
And exactly what they suck at, which they're not the same thing. Right?
And you have to. Yeah.
Not being good and sucking at something, but because they know they're good at something, it gives them the confidence to not be good at that. So going after something that you can be good at really, really does help you evolve yourself, because you now have the ability to go. It's hard because your ego still gets involved. Like I'm playing pickleball with a couple buddies, right? Yeah. And they don't know that I'm out there because I don't have a sparring partner right now, and I don't have a training facility, mainly because I don't want to take the time away from my family. And I have done so much of that stuff that it's time. I do need a little bit of time to kind of be away from it, but I'm out there just working on reaction time. Sure. I'm out there and working on some of the basic athleticism. I'm working on the court. Yep. But I did tell them, this is back when we started, first time I ever played was back in September, but I said by April, I'll be as good as you guys. And it's just that long-term mentality. It's just, I'm either going to be here going for it to the end, or I'm dead. Yeah. And I had this conversation with my wife and my family not too long ago, because I had how do I say this? I do know that I still have some deep-seated issues within myself, and so when I surf nowadays, I don't surf main breaks. I can't handle certain personalities, but I also know that I have a short fuse for certain things, and passing a certain point, which would be the safety point, I had explained to my family, I shaved that part of my being off at the bottom of some of my emotional and physical and where I was in certain parts of the world. I shaved that safety off. And so when it becomes a force thing in life, I have been to a point where if it's something that I believe in, I will go. And it does turn on, and it's sad to some level in a normal actuating society. But I do know that about myself, so I have to take myself, I've overdone it. I have to take myself out of certain circumstances that would, like being in crowds for a long time. I'm just now, after 7 years, like I don't have my hidden weapon. I'm not doing the full adjustment. And I've had to prep my wife, but she doesn't, we weren't together when I deployed, so she doesn't even get that part of me. And it's really, really hard. So I tell her when I am doing those things, I let her know. I don't mean it to scare her, but typically if I have like my pistol in my car, if I'm doing that, if I'm going a certain distance away from my house, and we've talked about this, like I have a sequence. It's all about getting back to them, and then actuating from there. Yeah. But when I feel that threat, there's a switch that kind of comes back on. And I'd say a switch, but there's no switch anymore. It's just, and that's I'm trying to add the switch back so that I don't lose it. I don't go beyond for something that's not that. Yeah. That's not really a threat. It's just something that's a perceived threat from a social interaction. And that's what I'll say that a lot of guys and gals appreciate about war, because it's simple. There's no social requirement. There's a lot of FOMO, but once you're there, there's no fear of missing out. You're there, and now the real thing is just don't die. Yeah. And so it's easy. It's black and white. We're talking about death daily, or killing at least. And so you're not really stuck with like, are you going to make the Susies tonight? Are you going to make it to this thing? Are you going to do that thing? And that, it starts to add up. And did you get back to that email? It's like, fuck your email. Yeah. Like when did the world become something where anybody, including a marketer, can come by and just say, hey, here's more for you to do. Right. Every day. Yeah. When I wake up, there's 100 more things I have to do. Nuh-uh. Yeah. There's not. And so I work, my family, we work very, very hard as entrepreneurs to push all that back, which I think is, I will say, one of the biggest downfalls in our current society is having an issue is people, kids in general, that they can't go out to practice and just have fun playing. They have to think about that paper they have to get done. And they're never going to get better at football. They're never going to enjoy football. And they won't even, I don't think they'll remember the memories quite the same if they don't just forget about that for a while. Yeah. Just completely forget about that stuff. And while you're here, that's not getting done. Yeah. So come out here and do this well. Put it out on the line. Dare to be great, and don't worry about failure, because all of us out here are failing. If we're not quite, the more we sweat in practice, in training, the less we bleed in war.
Sure.
The more we're out here failing as a team and finding that line where our failure line is all week long. On Thursday, the coach should know not to call that play.
Yeah.
If we fail at it every single time, Monday through Thursday, well, then Friday we're not calling that play just because we practice it.
Yeah.
His job was, in the first 3 games, we don't really think about those as pre-league games. I don't see enough coaches going out there for like passing league and just, let's not win today. Let's just see how far we can get with our quarterback playing cornerback or DB and our third string starting against this team, because the coaches' egos are in it. They have to win.
It's true.
For what?
Yeah.
Passing league looks nothing like real football because we've added the thing of collision, which, again, rules are moving away from. We've moved away from the ability for young men that have that inside of them, that want to go to the edge of the world for whatever that is. They need to be dangerous, because danger's coming at them, at least in previous years, in previous centuries, if you will. So they need to be dangerous. So they need to be able to practice that. They need to be able to challenge that. And so more coaches should have the ego settled within them, also within the parents. We're not going to win every passing league game. I don't want to win it. I'd rather lose every passing league game and win championship than be the championship pass and then get a 7-3 season.
Because you can tune those kids up that wouldn't normally have the opportunity. You take your starting quarterback and have them go out there and carve up in a 7-on-7. That's great. Good experience for them. But when that guy gets hurt and the second string guy comes out, if he's got no reps, right? And I agree with those things. And I also think that, your point to control, and it goes back, we talked about this a little bit earlier on, for you and for guys that are in the military, when you're in country, you're in conflict, that the rule book is a lot different than when you come back. And the transition from that rule book to the rule book back in the States, when you're around regular people. And I think that's why, we have such a challenge right now of getting people reacclimated. Mental health is, hey, if I'm in the military and I was in action, you've got your mission, you've got people that are like-minded that are around you, you're doing it for country, you've got a lot of resources, and you're doing it for your country, your family. You come back and it's like, I don't really have a mission other than what am I supposed to do next? I'm not really sure. The second thing is my buddies are scattered all around, and the people that are around me don't necessarily understand, and they don't see everything that I see. When they're at the Rose Bowl, they're just watching the cheerleaders. When I'm at the Rose Bowl, I'm like, holy shit, there's a lot of people around me, and I don't know why that guy's wearing a trench coat when it's 80 degrees out, right?
Correct.
And that transition is tough, and we've not done a good job of buffering it on the transition on the way back, but I think we're doing a worse job now of candy coating everything on the front end, because it's like, oh yeah, can't run the kid that hard, we can't do this. And then you have the kids that choose not even to do any of this stuff, and they're playing video games, and then the first time they get resistance, you can't just hit reset, oh, I get to respawn and I'm alive again. Yeah. It's like, no, you screwed that relationship up, or you created that problem, and then they don't know how to react to it, and they either lash out or they lash at themselves. Yeah. And I'm hopeful that we come to that conclusion. That's part of the reason for doing this. I mean, we're a football helmet company, and we're sitting here talking about all these deep topics, but the point is that a guy like you that played football and then got immersed into, the most violent aspect of the modern world in warfare, the things that you learned in football, and it helped you learn about yourself, help you learn about control, I'm sure make you a better father. In kind of closing this thing up, I want to ask you a little bit about with your kids. Will you, if they want to play football, you can have them play football. If they want to play other sports, I mean, what's your thought?
So I have 2 daughters and a son. The more I research on, and I do a lot of research on ancient knowledge about consciousness and what we are as a species. Really, the difference that we've evolved alongside the apes, but somehow we're driving cars and flying planes, and the chimps can barely use they don't have a mechanical, intuition to make more tools. They can use stuff as tools, but something's different about us.
Yeah.
And you ask a simple question. I would say that I will hopefully push my son in this case, and my daughter. She's not going to play football. That's just not her personality. She's, if you will, a traditional girl, very girly. Love it, everything about it, and inspire it. My son, if he wants to, he's naturally kind of physical. He's strong, and he likes the rough and tumble. Maybe it's because I'm rough with him, but it doesn't seem so. That being said, I think they're doing some good stuff with regards to brain safety. Head behind versus head in front. I was a lead with my head, my neck. Fractured my neck in college, and I was seeing black towards the end of my career. But I won't force it. I'll encourage to play and play hard. If it's something he gravitates toward and wants to, like my nephew's there right now, and he just loves it.
Sure.
He wants to train with me, and I do train with him and one of his buddies. And but I do appreciate the sport. I do appreciate where it's going and some of the changes that are happening. But like you said, there are ways to push yourself, and if it's not football, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
For my own kids, but. There's an old saying, know one thing to know 10,000 things, and that one thing ultimately, from what my research has shown and my personal experiences, is the self. So there are ways to go challenge yourself, and if you're not willing to challenge yourself, meaning willing to fail at something, and then get up tomorrow and make that failure into a success, and triumph to success, and failures triumphs, and you need to do that in life.
Sure.
And that's what I would love for all my kids to learn, whatever it is. If it's drawing, if it's whatever.
Don't be afraid to fail. Go out and do it, and learn from those. Yeah.
Don't look for failure. Don't try to fail. That's the difference, right? And that, again, I think the kids are trying. They're trying to learn from us, and we're trying to give them aspects. But then again, we put these things on it that's so nerfed out,
right,
that there's no real failure around it. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
I remember, down here, skateboarding was a big thing. Pulling ourselves in at 40 miles an hour with no helmets on. Again, board shorts and Vans.
Yeah.
Like, if I fall, these nipples are going bye-bye. Like, again, that's a big failure. That's a big push if you go bad there. But having some level of finding that line wherever you exist. And again, I think there's more extreme personalities that we want that.
Yeah.
We need that as a society. You don't want the person that's maybe really good in the office to go out and fight that fight.
Right.
They just won't succeed for us.
Right.
That we need. Why we can sit here when there's no weapons at the door protecting us.
Yeah.
A lot of other countries in the world, not all, but a lot of countries in the world, like our kids, our sons at 8 years old, will know how to action an AK.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because it's not because they want to. That's how they live.
Yeah.
And that we don't have, we as a society are growing ever far from that. And it's, Bobby, sit down, be quiet. Bobby, sit down, be quiet. Like, no. I'll just give a quick aside. I think that our educational system and our young kids are the future. So yours and my personal futures are that way.
Yeah.
The future is that way.
Yeah.
Right? So that way, that way. And I think that in the late elementary school years, somewhere in the junior high to early high school, and then maybe late high school, that there should be 3 years where maybe option, I don't know, to learn a trade.
Sure.
But that focuses on that school year, that takes the development of all the previous years and puts it into that trade, for a trade that you can learn at under 10.
Yeah.
A trade you can learn at those right at the cusp of puberty, and then maybe one you can learn like in that 17, 18 year, where it would give these kids all kids a chance to actually get out in the world and do it, feel the burden of having to get up and go perform.
I agree. Yeah.
Maybe even earn money at it, right?
Sure.
So now they can actually earn the understanding of a dollar through actualization and capability. And then on top of that, I don't think every human is designed to serve in the military, like some countries, which allows for that, right? Israel's what, 7 million person nation state. That's not even San Diego. You know what I mean?
Right.
They can get away with that, but I do think there should be a service of sorts that you can serve for 2 years, and through that service, you could serve for longer, but there's a 2-year kind of minimum, and you then start to get breaks on insurance. You can start to get breaks on weapons if you want to be a weapon owner type thing. Like,
Sure.
because you've got some of this training, but you've also learned about how to be a part of the whole. Even though you're different, I know I'm different. I don't expect people to get that, but I do to get that. So I know what I need to do differently.
Yeah.
But I also know that there's a whole here that we all have to participate in, and if we don't, man, the bottom is way further down than what we realize right now. That's for sure.
And we're facing a lot of challenges now, and I tell people that, on a small level, one of the things we're doing here and why we're in this business, and I've made a lot of money doing other things, and this has been a challenge. Throw the pandemic in, you're in kind of a old school mentality of, hey, we're going to buy the same shit from the same companies, same result. NFL comes out on Friday and says, oh, concussions are up 18%. And you ask any equipment guy and they'll be like, well, we want to protect our athletes. And why are you buying the same stuff, right? Yeah. Why are we using the same tests from 2017? Well, anyway, you put that aside. I think football's part of the solution.
Yeah.
It's certainly not part of the problem. And it teaches resilience and how do kids work together. And all the sports are good sports, but I think football just does it at a different level, and it's clearly had an impact on you. Just to wrap up, if I ask everybody this question at the end: how do you want to be remembered? What if somebody, the people around you and people that have experienced you and interacted with you, how do you want to be remembered to those people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, ultimately, I think in the end, personally,
yeah,
I say this wholeheartedly. I hope that the story that is written by me is that it's a love story. That's it. I hope it's something that passion, I think, is a part of that. I think commitment, but ultimately it's a love story that I don't say romanticized by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that's it.
Yeah.
Somebody would aspire to be like that because of the love side of it, not because of the negatives, if you will.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And that's kind of that overlying thing. When you wake up in the morning, you're looking at the sun and not at the dirt, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you exist. And we've known each other for a period of time, and I definitely see that, and I think that flows through your kids and the people that are around you. I appreciate you coming in today, sharing your story. It's a great story. It's an interesting story. We have different people in here, but to have somebody that played football at a high level and was in the military and now is the transition and is doing so many exciting things on the entrepreneurial side. We're thrilled to have you in here. Love to have you in here again.
Absolutely.
And I learned something about you today, and there's always something new. And I wrote some things down that I'm like, I got to make note of that. So thanks again for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Nick.
You bet it.
Yep.